little fox. The Phantom of the Opera. Chapter 1. The Phantom Appears. One winter evening, Monsieur Debienne and Monsieur Poligny, the managers of the Paris Opera House, were hosting a gala performance to celebrate their retirement. Mademoiselle Sorelli, one of the ballerinas, was in her dressing room, rehearsing her speech in their honor. Suddenly, 4 young dancers rushed in, shrieking.
"What are you doing here?"
Sorelli asked, annoyed at the interruption.
"It's the Phantom of the Opera!"
Cécile James said in a trembling voice as she locked the door.
"What do you mean?"
Sorelli asked.
"Have you seen him?"
"Yes, as clearly as I see you now!"
All the girls began talking at once. The phantom had appeared to them in one of the opera house's many passages. The opera house was a vast building, with 17 floors above ground and 5 floors of cellars below. For months, everyone had been discussing the figure who stalked the building from top to bottom like a shadow. People said the ghost dressed in evening clothes, comparing him to a man of fashion or an undertaker. And almost everyone claimed to have seen the phantom, although no one dared to speak to him.
"Did he say anything?"
Sorelli asked.
"You know he never speaks,"
Cécile said.
"He appears out of nowhere and then vanishes without saying a word."
"Hush! Listen!"
Little Meg Giry whispered, tilting her head toward the door.
"Someone's coming!"
Everyone strained their ears, but there were no footsteps in the passage. The only sound was a light rustling, as if someone wearing a silk gown were passing by. Sorelli was determined to get to the bottom of the situation. She approached the door and boldly called out,
"Who's there?"
Nobody answered, so she called again.
"Is anyone on the other side of this door?" "Of course there is."
Meg grabbed Sorelli by her skirt to keep her from moving.
"Whatever you do, don't open the door."
Although Sorelli was nervous, she didn't want the younger girls to know she was afraid. She threw open the door and looked up and down the empty passage, which was illuminated by only one gaslight.
"No one's there,"
she reported to the girls.
"But we saw the phantom!"
Cécile insisted.
"He must be prowling around somewhere."
"Be serious,"
Sorelli said.
"No one has really seen the ghost."
"We did!"
The girls cried as one.
"And Joseph Bouquet saw him on one of the staircases that lead to the cellars,"
Cécile said. Bouquet, the chief stagehand, had been the first to encounter the ghost. He described the phantom's head as skull-like, with black holes for the eyes and nose and a pale complexion. Some people thought Bouquet's assistants were playing a trick on him. But Bouquet was a serious, sober man, so not everyone dismissed his horrifying description. People also gave him the benefit of the doubt because he was a popular fellow backstage.
"My mother thinks Bouquet shouldn't talk about the ghost."
Meg spoke quietly, as if she feared being overheard. Her mother worked as an usher at the opera house.
"And why does your mother say that?"
Sorelli demanded.
"Because of his private box." "The phantom has a private box?"
Sorelli raised an eyebrow.
"Not so loud!"
Meg said.
"My mother is in charge of Box 5 on the Grand Tier, and no one has used it for over a month except the ghost. The box office has orders that the seats in Box 5 must never be sold to the public."
"So your mother has actually seen him at the opera?"
Cécile said.
"No, she's never seen him, But she's heard him, and she gives him his program.
All right, Meg, that's enough. Stop fooling with us,
Sorelli said. Meg began to cry.
I shouldn't have said anything, even though I'm right, and Joseph Bouquet shouldn't talk about things that don't concern him. Just last night, Mother was saying...
There was the sound of footsteps in the passage, and a voice cried,
Meg? Meg! Are you in there?
Open the door!
Meg cried.
It's my mother!
Sorelli opened the door, and a plump woman in a faded black dress and shawl entered the room, her eyes searching frantically for Meg.
It's terrible, just terrible.
The black feathers on Madame Giry's bonnet bobbed as she shook her head.
I heard all about it as soon as the performance ended, and I came to make sure you were all right.
Meg hurried to comfort her mother, who sank into a chair, breathing heavily.
What are you talking about, Mother?
Joseph Bouquet is dead!
The girls screamed and clutched each other's hands.
What happened?
Sorelli asked.
No one knows. He was found dead in the third cellar underneath the stage where the scenery is stored. He was lying between the farmhouse and the throne room.
It's the Phantom!
Meg said, and then immediately corrected herself.
No, I didn't mean that.
Yes, it must be the Phantom.
Cecile said.
We all know he's to blame whenever anyone has an accident. Just yesterday, the chorus master was so frightened by the ghost that he tripped and fell down a flight of stairs. He said the ghost matched Bouquet's description, except the head was a skull without skin. And last week, a fireman was inspecting the cellars when he went a little farther than usual and saw a flaming head. No body, just a head. The fireman emerged onto the stage so frightened that he practically passed out in Bouquet's arms.
Maybe the ghost has several heads that he changes whenever he pleases,
Meg suggested.
Hush, Meg.
Madame Giry warned. Sorelli, who had turned quite pale, quietly touched the horseshoe she'd hung up for good luck.
I'll never be able to give my speech now.
Suddenly, there was a knock on the door, and everyone fell silent.
Hurry up, ladies. It's time to meet your admirers in the ballet foyer.
A man's voice said.
Is your speech ready, Sorelli?
The ballerina breathed a sigh of relief when she recognized the voice of the manager's assistant.
We'll be out in a minute, Monsieur Mercier.
The ballet girls surrounded Sorelli like sheep around their shepherdess. As she led them to the ballet foyer, they trotted along the dim passages and staircases as fast as their little pink legs could carry them, while Madame Giry struggled to keep up. The Phantom of the Opera, Chapter 2, A New Star. As the dancers made their way to the ballet foyer, they discussed the horrible death of Bouquet. On the stairs, Mercier, the manager's assistant, stopped them when he overheard their conversation.
Have you girls heard about Bouquet already? Most people haven't, so please forget about it for tonight.
He waggled a finger at them.
And don't let Monsieur Debienne and Monsieur Poligny hear. It would upset the managers too much on their last night at the Opera House.
By the time the dancers reached the foyer, it was already full of people. Everyone was talking about the amazing performance they'd just witnessed. Many of the great composers of the day had appeared on stage, conducting their own works. But the real star was the young singer, Christine Daae. She'd begun with a few selections from Romeo and Juliet and concluded by singing the leading role of Marguerite in some excerpts from Faust. Carlota, a famous Spanish diva, usually sang Marguerite, but she was ill that night. So Christine, who usually portrayed a boy in Faust, had taken her place. And what a magnificent performance she'd given. The whole audience had risen to its feet, shouting, cheering, clapping, while a sobbing Christine was overcome by the response. She'd fainted in the arms of other singers and been carried to her dressing room. Everyone in the foyer wanted to know why Christine hadn't appeared in a leading role before this performance. Even more mysterious was the rumor that she didn't have a voice coach.
I hear she plans to keep rehearsing on her own with no intention of finding a coach.
One audience member confided to another.
Well, whatever she's doing, it's working. I attended one of her performances 6 months ago, and the difference between then and now?
The other man paused.
It's unbelievable.
Philippe, the Count de Chagny, should have been in the foyer, supporting his favorite dancer, Sorelli, as she gave her speech to the managers. Instead, he was following his much younger brother, Raoul, the Viscount de Chagny, through the maze of passages that led to Christine's dressing room.
Why are you in such a hurry?
Philippe asked his brother.
Didn't you see that poor woman faint? I must make sure she's all right.
Philippe smiled at his younger brother's urgent tone. Raoul was only 21 and obviously infatuated with the lovely young Christine. The two brothers forced their way through a crowd of singers and fans gathered outside Christine's dressing room. They reached her door just as the theater's doctor was arriving. Raoul rushed to the unconscious singer's side, while Philippe and the others pushed into the room.
Everyone should clear the room.
Raoul said to the doctor.
There's no space to breathe in here.
You're quite right.
The doctor sent everyone away except Christine's maid and Raoul. Christine's eyelashes fluttered as she regained consciousness. Turning her head, she spotted Raoul at her side and started.
Monsieur,
She said in a barely audible voice.
who are you?
Mademoiselle?
Raoul knelt on one knee and kissed her hand.
I'm the boy who went into the sea to rescue your scarf.
Christine looked nervously at the doctor and her maid, trying to gauge what they thought of Raoul's odd remark. When they laughed, Christine joined in, though she still looked uneasy. Raoul turned red with embarrassment and stood up.
Mademoiselle, since you don't seem to recognize me, I'd like to say something to you in private. Something very important.
Christine's voice shook.
You must wait until I am better.
The doctor nodded.
Please go now and let me attend to Mademoiselle.
Thank you, Doctor, but I would like to be alone.
Christine looked nervously around the room.
Please go away. All of you.
The doctor tried to protest, but observing Christine's agitation, he escorted Raoul from the room.
She's not her usual self. She's usually so gentle.
The doctor said. He bid Raoul good night and left him in the now deserted passage. Raoul thought Christine might attend the farewell ceremony in the ballet foyer, so he lingered in the shadows near her doorway. Soon the dressing room door opened, and her maid came out, carrying a bundle of laundry.
Excuse me, how is she?
Raoul asked.
She's quite well, but you must not disturb her because she wants to be alone. Good night, sir.
The maid hurried away.
Of course Christine told her maid that she wants to be alone.
Raoul said to himself.
That's because she's waiting for me. She knows I want to speak to her in private.
Raoul was about to knock on the door when he heard a man's voice inside the room.
Christine, do you love me?
The man said.
How can you ask that when I sing only for you?
Christine sounded sad and on the verge of tears. Raoul's heart was pounding so loudly that he was sure Christine and the man could hear it. The man spoke again.
Are you very tired, my dear?
Yes, I gave you my soul tonight, and I am dead tired.
Your soul is a beautiful thing, and I thank you. No emperor ever received so rare a gift.
Overcome with jealousy, Raoul heard nothing after that. But he now understood why Christine was so nervous. She was expecting this visitor. Raoul returned to the shadows, determined to wait for the man to leave the room. To his surprise, Christine appeared first, and she was alone. Raoul was still too rattled by what he'd overheard to approach her. He waited a few minutes before opening the door to her dressing room and found himself in complete darkness because the gas lights had been turned off.
I know someone's in here.
Raoul said with his back against the door.
Why are you hiding?
He lit the gas and searched behind the curtain that divided the room. But no one was there.
I must be going mad,
he thought. Raoul left the room in a daze. At the bottom of a staircase, he felt an icy draft. Suddenly, 2 men were behind him, carrying something under a white sheet.
Excuse me,
Raoul said.
Can you tell me the way out?
The door's open straight ahead.
One man grunted.
Thank you. What's that you're carrying?
That is Joseph Bouquet, the chief stagehead whose body was found tonight in the 3rd cellar beneath the stage.
The man explained. Raoul removed his hat as a mark of respect for the dead and let the men pass. The Phantom of the Opera, Chapter 3, The Phantom's Demands. By the time Raoul left the opera house, the elite of Parisian society had filled the ballet foyer. Sorelli, anxious to give her speech, waited impatiently for the arrival of the retiring managers. Cécile, seeming to forget the death of Joseph Bouquet, laughed and joked with everyone.
Cécile, stop fooling around and be quiet.
Sorelli snapped as Debienne and Poligny made their way through the crowd. When they reached the front of the room, she smiled and raised her glass to toast them. She had just begun her speech when Cécile screamed in terror.
The Phantom of the Opera!
Cécile pointed at a pale man with black holes where his eyes should have been.
He's here!
Everyone laughed and pushed, trying to see the opera ghost, but he slipped through the crowd.
Where is the opera ghost?
The other dancers tried to calm Cécile and Meg, who were frantically screaming. Sorelli struggled to smile while the managers kissed her, thanked her, and disappeared as quickly as the ghost.
I didn't even get to finish my speech,
she complained to Count Philippe de Chagny.
The beginning was wonderful,
he said.
The managers have to attend another reception in the singer's foyer, and then a supper for their friends in the lobby outside their office. They don't have time to appreciate you like I do.
Sorelli beamed at the Count and let him kiss her hand. When the managers finally arrived for supper, they were greeted by their successors, Monsieur Moncharmant and Monsieur Richard. The new managers were passing around their master keys because the guests were fascinated that just 2 tiny keys could open the many doors of the opera house. As the managers, old and new, took their seats at the center of a long table, not everyone was examining the keys. Some people had noticed a strange skeletal figure sitting silently at one end of the table.
Have you heard about the opera ghost?
One man whispered to his wife. They were sitting among the new manager's friends.
Oh, yes.
She replied.
I was just thinking that person at the end of the table would make a good phantom.
Yes, but he seems to have a nose, and the opera ghost supposedly doesn't have one.
The woman gave a skeptical frown as she furtively studied the stranger.
His nose looks so transparent that it can't be real.
Fake nose are real. Have you ever seen that man before?
No, he must be a friend of Debienne and Polynice.
Meanwhile, the former manager's friends were having similar conversations and deciding that the cadaverous figure must be a friend of the new manager's. All the managers were too busy talking and accepting congratulations to notice the stranger until he spoke.
The ballet girls are saying that Joseph Bouquet is dead.
The mysterious man announced.
What are you talking about?
Debienne asked.
Is he really dead?
Poligny said.
Yes,
replied the man.
His body was found in the third cellar below the stage, where they keep the old sets. Rather appropriate for the chief stagehand.
The former managers looked at the man and then at each other. They had both turned whiter than the tablecloth.
You need to come with us,
Debienne whispered to the new managers, while Poligny muttered an excuse to the guests. All four went into the manager's office, and Debienne closed the door.
Do either of you know that man who told us about Joseph Bouquet?
Poligny looked concerned.
I've never seen him before,
Moncharmant said.
I'd certainly remember if I'd ever met someone who looked like that,
Richard added.
We have something to tell you,
Debienne began.
Change all the locks immediately,
Poligny interrupted.
But don't tell anyone you changed them,
his former partner added. They said this in such a peculiar way that the new managers began to laugh.
What's the problem?
Moncharmant asked.
Are the thieves at the opera house?
It's worse than that,
Debienne said.
There's a ghost! And he's given us explicit orders to tell you to be pleasant to him and grant any request he makes.
Poligny nodded in agreement.
We wouldn't have mentioned him, but Joseph Bouquet's death reminded us that whenever we've disregarded the ghost's wishes, something terrible has happened.
The new managers laughed again, certain that this was some kind of joke. Richard had a reputation for practical jokes, so he was sure someone was trying to fool him.
And what does this ghost of yours want?
He asked, playing along. Poligny went over to his desk and picked up a black book.
You gentlemen have a copy of the contract for the operation of the opera house.
He turned the pages until he came to one written in red ink.
Oh, I don't think ours contains that page,
Richard said.
What strange handwriting.
It looks like the writing of a child who's just learning to print.
Moncharmant studied the page.
And I'm positive that our book doesn't contain this clause.
Pointing to the page with a shaking finger, he read aloud.
The managers must pay the opera ghost an allowance of 240,000 francs a year, with 20,000 francs due each month in cash.
Unlike his partner, Richard did not appear troubled by the phantom's demands.
Is that all he wants?
He asked sarcastically.
Doesn't he have any other demands?
As a matter of fact, he does.
Poligny flipped the pages until he came to the section about boxes for viewing performances. Certain boxes were reserved for free use by important people, such as the President of France. At the end of this section of the contract, another line had been added in the crude red handwriting.
Box 5 on the grand tier shall be made available for the opera ghost for every performance.
Well, gentlemen, it seems to me that you were much too kind to this ghost.
Richard gave them a patronizing smile.
If I were dealing with such a troublesome phantom, I wouldn't hesitate to have him arrested.
But how?
The former managers cried in unison.
When he arrives at his box, obviously,
Richard said.
But we've never seen him in his box,
Debienne said.
Then I'd sell the seats to someone else,
Richard replied.
Sell the ghost's box. I'd like to see what happens when you try that,
Poligny said, while Debienne looked grim. Richard, convinced this was all a joke, began laughing hard. Soon Moncharmin joined in, tears streaming down his cheeks.